My guest today is Jonathan Mitchell. Jonathan is a senior citizen autistic, author, autism advocate, and has a blog, Autism Gadfly, where he discusses views of autism. Jonathan has a strong voice against neurodiversity and autism research. He is a checks and balance for autistics that face different challenges in society. His book, The Mu Rhythm Bluff, about a middle-aged autistic, can be found on Amazon. Please see the show notes for links to Jonathan's work. Before we begin the conversation with Jonathan, I couldn't help but notice the amount of challenges that Jonathan has struggled with. Take note of the biology of the autistic phenotype, of course, has its own sets of problems in life functioning. But what really captured my attention is the amount of problems from the outside in, such as the education and the early treatment and employment. There's a lifelong history of pressure and implications from the outside. This, in my opinion, is what really holds autistics back. It's not so much the challenges of the autistic phenotype, which I am not discounting. However, the amount of inability of society to adapt to the certain type of different phenotype is the biggest challenge. And now, my conversation with Jonathan Mitchell. Jonathan, why don't we start with you explaining your life story to me, and we'll go into when you first noticed things were maybe even a little different.
Well, that goes back as long as I can remember. When I was 4 years old and going to the summer school to see if I could get into this kindergarten, and I remember my mom telling me, they said you're not ready to, go to this private kindergarten, and that's like probably my earliest memory. Of course, my parents noticed, something was wrong, before I was 3 years old, because, I guess up until 2 or 2.5, I had like the normal developmental milestones, and then, I either completely stopped talking or mostly stopped talking at like about 2.5, but then recovered my speech, between ages 4 and 5. And I guess they took me to a neurologist because they had no idea what was wrong with me. And I guess the neurologist didn't know either, because hardly anybody had heard of autism in 1958 when I was 2 years old going on 3 years old. So they figured it was like some sort of emotional problem. So they sent me to a psychoanalyst, and I had regular sessions with her, for about 10 years or a little more, until I was like about 13 and a half. And I guess if you want to hear other relevant things, I was a special ed student, for most of the 60s. Like I went to this special, like this private kindergarten that let me in, but then, my mother didn't like that, and she put me in this other kindergarten, like for my second semester of kindergarten, and my behavior problems were so bad, I was expelled, from that kindergarten. Then I was in special ed, for about 8 years. Like at 12, I was put like in I gave me a try at a mainstream private school, but I was expelled from there after about half a semester. And then when I was 14 in 1969, they put me like in the 8th grade, and then I graduated from high school, barely graduated from college, and then I had a succession of jobs. As I know you seem to have read a lot of stuff about me, as I guess I was fired from about 20 jobs, but I worked sporadically from age 24 to 51, and then retired some years ago at age 51. I don't know what else I can say, or unless you want to ask something more specific.
Sure. Whenever you were explaining your journey in education and getting expelled and such, can you remember some of those challenges that you had?
Well, I had behavioral problems. I lost my temper, sometimes, and the other kids picked on me, and that sort of brought out the worst in me, and I would get in yelling, fights and stuff with them, like at this private school where I was expelled at age 12, and and as you probably know, I have bad fine motor coordination problems where I can hardly write. I can write so that it's pretty legible, but it's very slow, and it looks like quote unquote brain damaged writing quite quite a bit. And also, I've had very few friends, and except for some casual dating, never really had a girlfriend, and yeah, and it's been difficult. I'm not sure what else I can say.
So the writing, it's huge in school too, that we must write and keep up with everything. Did you find yourself having problems with just keeping up with the teacher in the classroom, the pace of the classroom?
Well, sometimes I had difficulty concentrating, and it was hard for me.
And those were probably just some things that the other students pointed out and then would start the bullying. It kind
Yeah.
of sounds like. And at this point, your parents in the school, they 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 didn't think autism at this point.
Well, I don't think so. Except I guess my mother heard about autism in like the mid 1960s, and I guess she asked my my psychoanalyst, who was like my therapist at the time, and if I was autistic, and then she said no, just that my parents caused these problems somehow, and from trauma that I had as an infant or a toddler, and then I guess in 1968, we took a trip back east, for my aunt's wedding, and for some reason there was some psychiatrist in New York in 1968, who child psychiatrist, that they thought had like some expertise, and though my parents didn't tell me this for many years, I guess she was the first one who diagnosed me as being autistic, and then I guess I saw another psychiatrist in Los Angeles to starting when I was 13. When I finished, my parents didn't like the progress I was making with the psychoanalysis, so they switched therapists. And I think he also said I was autistic, but like he never told me. My parents never told me. Then, when I was 21, I was hoping Ritalin would help, and I went to the psychiatrist at UCLA, who said, yeah, like what you have, is like autism. This was like in 1977.
Yeah. So the psychoanalyst, the view back then was it was apparent an issue with parental, and that was very unfortunate. Um,
Yeah,
and that hinges from that psychoanalytic view.
yeah.
They're very biased towards that, and I imagine your parents, that was harmful to them to hear that. Hopefully, they didn't agree with it. Um,
Well, I guess they sort of did for a while, but I guess they did for a brief time. But then I guess I had like a psychological assessment, where they gave me like IQ tests, and the Bender Gestalt and other psychometric tests, and that indicated like some sort of brain damage. And then I guess they thought of me as being neurologically impaired.
during this time, did you have questions or did you have worries about, you know, something about me is different than these other kids?
Well, not really, not that I can really think of. I guess I wasn't aware of how bleak the future, would become. But I guess it could have been worse. I've had some success. I worked, graduated college. I've worked sporadically, had a few friends, was able to get some writing done and stuff like that.
You graduated from UCLA, correct?
Yeah, well, I went there I went to Santa Monica Community College for my first half of college. Then I went to UCLA for 2 years for my second half of college. I transferred the units from SMC, and I ended up getting a bachelor's from UCLA, like in 1979.
What was your degree? Or what is it?
Psychology.
Psychology, okay.
Bachelor of Arts in Psychology.
Okay. Do you think that kind of comes from your experience?
Yeah, well, I had thought that maybe I might like to be a psychologist because I, had many, like 18 years of therapy, and, I wanted to be like sympathetic and sort of try to help solve people's problems. And I thought there was some way, that I could find some sort of breakthrough for my own problems. But in retrospect, I would have been better off, trying to do something else. And I guess I don't have what it takes, to get a PhD in psychology or neuroscience or whatever.
You're very interested in, is it mirror neurons? Do you actively?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was, many years ago, but yeah, I read Marco Iacoboni's book about mirror neurons, and I thought, it might be an answer to my problems. But now I'm not so sure because, I'm not sure if mirror neurons, are behind the etiology of autism or not. But I guess, like there's like structural damage, like in the frontal area and Broca's area of the brain, like in, the premotor cortex where mirror neurons exist. And as I wrote a novel based on the premise, that if somebody could really improve, their mirror neuron functioning, then they could become like a poker expert and win a lot of money at poker.
You have an interest outside of your writing in poker, correct?
Oh yeah, I read. I do other things and watch some movies on Amazon Prime and stuff like that.
Tell me about your experience with the Ritalin. I guess
Well, the doctor I saw, prescribed it, and he sort of said, it's a long shot. Like at your age, it usually doesn't do much good, and it probably wouldn't help your type of problem. But he prescribed it. I tried it. It didn't seem to work, and then I stopped it. And there isn't really anything more to it than that.
Okay. I guess I was shocked about the time frame of it. If it was modern day, I could see that because that seems to be our first option is psychopharmacology.
Yeah, well, Ritalin was a popular drug for ADHD, like in the 70s, and people were giving people medications for various things. I guess they still give like antipsychotics to autistics to calm them down, but I don't think there's like a specific autism medication that's been invented yet.
Yeah, that's correct. I'm not so sure how I feel about the medical field giving antipsychotics to autistics either. I think it's very concerning. After you graduated UCLA, what was your first profession?
Well, I worked in a warehouse, for about 4 months, and then didn't like that and quit after that. Loading, merchandise on industrial pallets, and then I typed prescription labels, for a pharmacy, and then I had a bunch of data entry jobs where I got fired, and then I went to the California State Department of Rehabilitation, and they sent me to the school where they taught me the rudiments of medical transcription, and then I did, medical transcription off and on for about 20 years, I guess. And then, I haven't worked since.
Yeah, I don't think people understand how difficult autism and employment is. There are many challenges presented in employment, including the social communication and interaction aspect. It's very hard to navigate that.
Yeah, of course, I worked remotely, like for the last 9 years I worked, and that helped a bit. But when I was first working, that option didn't exist.
Yeah.
But then they developed computers and modems, and like where you could like do a lot of jobs from home. But I guess after the job I had for like 9 years ended, I tried a couple other jobs, and they either didn't work out or I got fired. And I guess I got fired after a day or 2 days from my very last medical transcription job. And then I was getting enough money from my parents as an early inheritance, and I retired at 51. And like about, I guess that was like over 17 years ago.
Yeah. Did the employers know of a condition?
A couple of them did, because right after I was getting fired from some medical transcription jobs, I joined up with this organization with the acronym ADEPT. I don't remember what it stood for, but they would pay part of the employee's salary like for the first month or something like that, but you had to do, like for disabled people, but you had to disclose your disability to the employer. And there was one job I got where they made an agreement with ADEPT that I had for about a month, and I got fired from that. Then I went to another job, and they didn't, and I guess they knew there was something amiss, and they just wanted to work. They didn't want to work with ADEPT. They just wanted to work with me themselves. And but I had that job for a little over 2 years, and the company went out of business. And other than, I guess it was just in those two instances that I disclosed, or my disability was disclosed to an employer. Other than that, I'm sure they knew something was very wrong with me, but I guess they didn't know what.
Huh. It might have been just they had just assumed get rid of you instead of trying to work with you. And I don't know how the views in employment and rules and regulations, actually laws, were back then.
Well, there was no Americans with Disabilities Act, prior, to 1990, as you probably know, and that was like the first, and there was an 11-year period before that, between, where I worked sporadically from 1979 to 1990, and then I guess they had the ADA, but I don't think it really does much good, for autistic people. It's better. Because employers are required to give quote unquote reasonable accommodations, to disabled employees, but that's like ramps, for wheelchair users, braille for blind people, or larger, or if somebody's just like visually impaired, like a larger computer screen. But it doesn't require employers to put up with poor behavior from autistic people. And this has been upheld in like at least 2 or 3 federal court decisions, contrary to what people say, that employers are supposed to give you like whatever accommodations you want. If you're autistic, they're supposed to structure it for you. But there might be some accommodations for autistics that are illegal, like if they had sensitivity to light or something like that, and the room had like bad, like fluorescent lighting, which they were sensitive to, then they could ask to be put in another room. But if an employee makes a lot of mistakes or has poor behavior, employers aren't legally required to put up with that. So I don't really think the ADA or accommodations for autistic people really do much good or really an answer.
Yeah, that's well said. I don't really keep up with the ADA and how they've changed that now.
Well,
Do you have
not
any?
many people do.
Do you have any?
I've just read about some of these issues because, as you may know, I sort of wrote like a nonfiction book about neurodiversity, and I was trying to dispute like what Ari Neyman, if you've heard of him, was claiming, or he was claiming that they should have like a social ramp for autistic people, analogous to like a ramp for wheelchair users, but there's no legal basis for that statement, because there have been court decisions where the employee asked the employer to accommodate like behavioral issues, and the courts ruled against the autistic litigants.
Yeah. Wow. When did you first begin to speak out against these things that's not right in society?
Things that aren't right in society?
Yes. For instance, the movement of neurodiversity.
Oh, well, if you mean like when I started speaking out against neurodiversity, I guess it was like in the earliest days of the internet list serves. This was like like a little over 20 years ago, in the early 2000s. They had these very, I guess the term neurodiversity hadn't been coined yet, but they had like these list serves in the old days of the internet. I forgot their specific names, and a lot of people would post, "Oh, I don't want to be cured. Most or all autistics don't want to be cured. And if society changed, we could function as well as non-autistic people." And then I got into some debates and disputes with some of those people. That this was maybe around 2000, 2001, I guess.
Yeah, you have a strong stance on. So I read here from Newsweek described you as an extremely controversial voice in the autism blogosphere for wanting a cure and discussing the need to consider the longer term effects of autism. And after I read that, wanting a cure doesn't seem controversial to me. And wanting to discuss the longer term effects of autism doesn't seem controversial to me either. In fact, autism research now is shifting towards adult autistics and needing this information about these long-term implications.
Well, I'm not I'm not sure if that's a question, but well, the Newsweek article, it was sort of borderline tabloid journalism, where they blew some things out of proportion and wrote some unfavorable things about me, and I guess it did give some balance to both views. But I guess a cure is like a controversial issue, because a lot of people don't want it, or they believe it's saying their child or themselves are defective or bad. So it makes a lot of people angry. And there was an organization, Cure Autism Now, if you remember them, that existed from like 1994 to 2005, before Autism Speaks bought them out. And the neurodiversity people would rail against CAN, and claim that, their goal was to find, a way to abort autistic fetuses, and that's what a cure and prevention really meant. And there are a lot of people that, for a variety of reasons, who oppose this. And as you probably know, Autism Speaks did like a completely 180 from their position, from like finding a cure for autism was like their ultimate goal, and now they go out of their way to say how they're against a cure for autism, and they appointed like two neurodiversity extremists to their board of directors. One who's Stephen Shore, who said autism is a superpower, and Valerie Paradise, who said autism isn't a disability, it's a strength. And
this
so
is
so it's a controversial issue in some circles, but I agree it shouldn't be.
yes, correct. This is a very delicate subject, I believe, because there are some abilities and superpowers, but for a population, if we just split the autistic population, there are some, or I should say many occasions or occurrences that they likely don't have the superpowers, or society doesn't allow them to navigate towards their superpowers. Because I think a lot of society just traps the autistic phenotype. And that's one of the things that I want to help remove, or at least bring attention to.
Yeah, well, I've written about that. I had an article published in Autism Parenting Magazine about the male female ratio, and how the neurodiversity people say things that have no scientific basis whatsoever, that that autism is underestimated in females, that there might be an actual 2-to-1 ratio rather than a 4-to-1 ratio, or some people even go as far as saying there are just as many autistic females as males. But and now social camouflage has become sort of a hot issue in autism research, and I've been reading about that and hoping to write an article about that someday. But I really put camouflage and masking in the same categories as astrology and voodoo.
Yeah.
So no, there isn't. I mean, I believe the 4-to-1 ratios, are genuine, and are due to some either differences in hormones or brain physiology in males or females, or the fact that the female has an extra X chromosome. I'm not sure if the specific is known, but there's been tons of research done on the female protective effect, showing that females have to have like a stronger hit of genetic mutations to become autistic. And I guess there have been some other studies, I don't remember the exact specifics, that show there's some biological thing that makes males more vulnerable to autism than females. And it's also true in other developmental disabilities like dyslexia, ADHD, stuttering. There's a similar ratio.
Yeah. It's all it's all very unknown to us, I think, a little bit too much. One of the things that I question with autism research is it needs to go after the cause foremost, and then early diagnosis seems to be important to me just because of the outcome. The earlier one is known to be an autistic, the better the outcome. And then what we briefly discussed a minute ago, or I mentioned about the longer term effects of autism in adults. However, autism research seems to just be, in my opinion, all over the place. There are things that we're sending money to and time and energy, and it doesn't really seem like it has a lot of I don't know, input, or there's a place for it. It's just a lot of odd research.
Yeah, well, I guess that's true. Like, I don't understand why Autism Speaks awarded Lauren Motrin, a $500,000 research grant, even though I guess that's kind of old news now. And you might remember Simon Baron Cohen's groups. I think somebody named Godwin or something. She was the lead author of this paper that claimed autistics had like superhuman vision and like a visual acuity of like 27, the same as birds of prey. And then it was shown, then the study was retracted because it was either an incompetently done study or a hoax. I realize I can't prove it was a hoax, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. Those birds have two foveas, so I doubt that we can even come close to that. And you just even mentioning that Motrin, it kind of just highlights what is going on behind the scenes, and if they want to find a cause or a cure, and what their purpose is. Now, our medical paradigm, it's easy to say that we just want to discover prescription medications to treat things, not fix things, but just to treat them. And that's my concern. Let's talk about your blog where you call out Autism Speaks about the self-identifying, how they just accept people that just self-identify as autistic without even a clinical diagnosis.
Well, I'm not sure I remember that post. I've written hundreds of blog posts, but I guess most people have in the autism world seem to have that view. So I guess Autism Speaks, sounds familiar. I'm not exactly sure which specific post you're referring to, but I do seem to remember something like that where they say like they accept people who identify as being autistic, but that's all I remember.
Yeah, they took it, or they added it to their mission statement, and I think
Yeah.
you were talking about.
As we talked about before, as you know, like they, Steve, like they were getting a lot of flack about not having any people with autism on their board of directors, and the thing with the cure, and then Steve Silberman got like this op-ed piece published in the Los Angeles Times about all these issues with Autism Speaks, and then shortly after that they did a complete 180. They dropped the words cure and prevention and global health crisis from their mission statements, and they put the two autistics on their book, Stephen Short, who said autism is a superpower, and Valerie Paradise, who said it isn't a disability and it's a strength, and she wasn't even diagnosed with autism until she was in her 40s, like many years after her son, had like an Asperger's diagnosis, and I've met her, and I don't really understand how she qualifies for an autism diagnosis, but maybe there's an explanation for it. I don't know.
Huh. You also wrote about Gates, Einstein, and Jefferson, how people just, it's easy for them to say, oh, they're autistic. And it's like they just want to strengthen the group, it seems like to me, without any accuracy.
Well, that was one of my earlier articles. It's been about 20 years, since I wrote that, and then I guess it was sort of self-published on my website that this guy who heard me on the radio made for me in about 2008, and he used to, get a lot of traffic, and it was high up. If you like type Gates autistic into Google or other search engines, it came up very high for a long time, but no more.
To me, it's like we open up this group of neurodiversity, and then people can just say that they're neurodiverse, and then there's and then that's where it kind of stops. We People just like to say, "Oh, that's just my ADHD," or "Oh, that's just my autism," and they want to identify it as something, maybe to help them manage any type of conflict or troubles that they are going through.
Yeah, I guess that's a fair assessment.
I don't know, because society doesn't really know what to do with it after that. And plus, we love to label people. That's what we like to do. We like to subordinate people and just call it that. What led to um, what led to the book, The Moo Rhythm Bluff?
Well, I have an interest in poker. And to this day, I still play it. Sometimes swear that I'll quit, but then I end up, I enjoy it, and I've been a losing player, and as we discussed before, I was interested in mirror neurons as like a possible cause of autism, and I was wondering, what if somebody had like super mirror neuron ability, like, and they were interested in poker, would this enable them, to have like a superpower where they could be like an expert poker player? And it's fiction, of course, but that's what really got me to write the novel. And I've been interested in writing novels, and I've written 4 other novels, besides that one, but they're not published. The Moo Rhythm Bluff was my second novel, and I'm hoping to get like this follow-up of the Moo Rhythm Bluff published someday. I don't know if I ever will, and I don't really care for self-publishing novels anymore.
Do you find it hard to kind of promote yourself and market yourself?
Yeah, it's hard for everyone, but I haven't. But considering I was like an obscure, but I've done fairly well over the years. Considering I was basically an obscure blogger, but I was able to get on, as get on NPR, Newsweek, things like that. But people were more interested in my nonfiction, my ideas, like about neurodiversity, than in you know my fiction writing. And yeah, it's very hard for an anti-neurodiversity person to get promoted because they have so much power. There are a lot of people that believe in that. They have billionaire patrons like George Soros. They have the whole media, the whole government, most of the private autism organizations on their side. So yeah, it's hard to promote yourself, and it's sort of like a lone soldier trying to take on the whole Russian army with like a BB gun or maybe even a pea shooter.
Yeah, yeah, that's well said. It's a group in or group think, group in, group out, and that's why maybe organizations like Autism Speaks just opened it up to just it allows them to get their marketing out and get more attention onto them, and then they can get more fundraising and more power. Perhaps, I don't know,
I
but
don't either.
but Autism Speaks, the organization, over time is very different. Whenever you get into this mode of writing a novel, and I'm just curious if the symptom of restricted fixated interest, do you find yourself like that's the only thing that you want to do?
No, it's something I'm interested in. Sometimes it's hard for me to sit down and apply myself, like because of my disability. Though I guess I've gotten a little better as I've gotten older. But I've wanted to write an article about social camouflage, but there's a lot of literature to read, and I want to really know it well before. But I end up procrastinating, and but hopefully someday I'll write that article. I don't know whether I'll be able to get it published anywhere or not.
What's the name of your second book, or the one that you're currently trying to get published?
Oh, my latest one, yeah,
Yeah.
Gamma Gets Girls. It's sort of similar to the Moo Rhythm Bluff, except Bright. If you read the Moo Rhythm Bluff, you remember the neuroscientist Bryce Blalock, and this sort of not exactly a sequel, but a follow-up where instead of using the mirror neuron hypothesis of autism, like he deals with the lack of gamma wave synchronization, and they not only use transcranial magnetic stimulation, but also this technique that was inspired by this neuroscientist Yuri Danilov, where he puts some electrodes on the tongue and their nerves that connect to the brain stem, which connects to the various parts of the brain. And I guess it's similar to TMS, and I use these in the book Gamma, but the side effect is that it makes them like irresistible to women, and then they have some the two autistic protagonists have some adventures and problems based on this newfound popularity with women. And well, I don't know what else I can say about it, but I don't plan to self-publish it. I don't know if I'll ever be able to get an agent or get it published.
Okay. It's your writings. How much of your life do you integrate into these characters in your books?
Quite, a fair amount. I guess not 100%, but a very high percentage. Like a lot of the protagonists are sort of based on myself. In a lot of my fiction, like I wrote about things that happened to me. Of course, with some embellishment. And
yeah, that makes it even kind of a more genuine story to me. Whenever you or anyone can integrate their own personal life and experience and into this other story. Hopefully it's maybe even empowering, or it could give people hope and insight from the outside.
I don't know. I have trouble getting exposure, and since I stopped blogging in Autism Gadfly, I haven't had as much publicity. Occasionally I get requests from people like you and stuff, but I don't get a whole lot, so I'm not that well known. Even though I've had some big media exposure like Newsweek, NPR, being published in The Spectator.
It's definitely a side on autism. You go up to bat for autism, in my opinion.
Well, I'd like to beat it into submission with a bat, actually, but but I don't think science has really advanced to that level yet, and because of neurodiversity and our government and a lot of other things, they impede advancement into trying to find causes and like treatment breakthroughs for autism. So it's, in my opinion, at least, it's gotten a lot worse.
Yeah, questioning the purpose of things. Talk to me about your involvement in research. How did that come about? With
I maybe you're referring to like being a subject for the Corshane Research Group.
Yes, I've covered a lot of his work.
It started, like I guess in late 1988, early 1989, when people were starting to analyze, autistic brains with, MRI scans, and the Corshane group was sort of at the forefront of that. And then, they had an article, published in the New England Journal of Medicine about how they had found, some portions of the cerebellar vermis were smaller in autistics than like an age, matched controls. And then there was a front page story about the, on the LA Times about that. So I called their group and talked to the, Eric Corshane's wife at the time, and and I said, "Are you looking for subjects for MRIs?" And they said, "Yes, we are." And then I drove, from Los Angeles to San Diego. It's about a 2-hour drive between Los Angeles and San Diego, and where their group is. And I had a couple of MRI scans, of my brain. I guess I participated in some of their revoked, potential studies. But then, I wasn't sure how much they could help, and I tried to ask for some results of something I was in, and then Corshane never replied, so I just stopped being involved, with their research group. I'm not sure what else I could say about it.
So you don't know the results of your scans?
Well, I know that, like, I had like an average, like the lobial 6 and 7 of my cerebellar vermis were like about an average size of an autistic. And then there was some other experiment. I don't remember. It's many years ago. So, but then, I just sort of lost contact with them. And then they were sort of interested in maybe having me do, a research for this, stem cell thing they were involved in, which would require them like grafting some skin for my buttocks, and I guess trying to develop like sort of like an embryological brain from, I thought about participating in that, but it would mean driving to San Diego and maybe having to spend like a few days there, and I just wasn't really interested. And then there's this group at Caltech that this guy Ralph Adolphs has, and I participated in some of their eye tracking studies, but it wasn't something I was really interested in, so I stopped doing that. Other than that, I've really had no involvement in autism research except in those 2 instances as a subject and not as a researcher, and I guess that's about the extent of my quote unquote involvement in autism research.
Ralph Adolphs is quite the name in neuroscience.
You've heard of him, eh?
Yeah.
I didn't know many people had heard of him. Because he just has an interesting name. Yeah.
Well, no, I'm very familiar with his work and the work from UC San Diego with the embryo. I think he actually does pretty good work. Kirchesney, or I fell with his name. What's next for you, Jonathan?
I guess dropping dead, because I'm so obese and I'm nearly 69 years old, and so I'm not other than that I'm not sure. I guess what I hope is the very next thing is that I'll be able to write that article debunking social camouflage and masking that Neurodiversity writes about, and I've read enough to see that it's basically junk science, and I hope to write an article about that someday. And I'd like to write another novel, or other than that, I guess that's about it. I guess I'm not sure what comes next for me long term. If I live long enough.
Some of that research that you hint on is, I call clickbait. They publish it just for recognition, is my perspective.
Well, there's certainly no scientific basis for it, except I guess the CatQ, they have a new camouflage instrument that's, I guess, been standardized, but what it exactly measures and how it can show that somebody can disguise their autism more successfully. I don't know, and there have been, and the results in the camouflage area are mixed. There are some studies that don't show a superior ability of women to camouflage over men based on that measurement, and they had a lot of other camouflage before the cat cue was developed. They had some other measurements, but these were just created on the fly, and they weren't validated in any way. Just very, very unscientific, and or they had people who they responded to and would advertise in places where they could attract women who were diagnosed in middle age allegedly, and they were the participants in a lot of the there's a lot of and other than Eric von Bohn's article, he wrote it, or I guess an editorial in Molecular Psychiatry, I haven't been able to find any published anti-masking camouflage article, and if there's one in the popular press, I'm not aware of it.
Mm. It has a lot of traction, and things like that do have a lot of traction because that's what people can understand with autism. They understand some of the autistic phenotype, and it makes sense to them. And my opinion is the things that make sense to others, the lay public and professionals and researchers, then they get hitched on to that, and they won't expand beyond that. Now, with the social camouflaging, I guess I can see that navigating the social world is very demanding, especially for autism, with the excitation and inhibition imbalance and all of that metabolic demand. Maybe they are trying to highlight that, and it just takes a lot to kind of fit in. There's a lot of social pressures to fit in. I don't know.
I don't either.
What's one thing you would like to know about autism that isn't known?
Well, what causes it, at least in some specific situations, and I'm trying to think of what else. Yeah, I guess and knowing how it could be legitimately treated, because I don't really believe there are any legitimate good treatments for autism.
Yeah, I would question if there's a medication or a shot. I would say a shot, but that would be something that would be explored. I don't think those are the answers. Is there anything else that you want to cover or talk about before I let you go?
Not that I can think of. I guess we've talked about an hour, so I think you have enough, for a good podcast. And I hope your listeners like what I have to say. And I thank you for having me on your podcast.
Yeah, Jonathan, I appreciate this. This all came out pretty quick. So we just kind of did this in the last couple of days. I was really drawn to your X account, especially your X name.
That's what I'm very active with now, and my new handle is something pretty new.
Yeah. Why don't you share that with us?
I tweet anti-ND with loud hands.
I appreciate
it. Because you may be familiar, like Julia Bascom, who's a big neurodiversity proponent, I think wrote this book called Loud Hands, because supposedly she was in ABA as a child, and the therapist would say quiet hands, like when she moved her hands. So I sort of took it from that.
We didn't talk about ABA, but I question that as well.
The next time, maybe.
Yeah. I will be looking out for your work your newest writings, and good luck on the book
Okay,
publishing.
thanks.
And we will interact on X maybe some more about,
Okay, sure.
especially about the cause of autism.
Okay.
Jonathan, thank you for joining, and your story is incredible.
Yeah, thank you.
If you are listening to the podcast, please feel free to leave a review or rating. In podcasting, reviews, ratings, and downloads are huge, and I very much appreciate your feedback. You can contact me on X at RPS47586 for any discussion about autism. I'm always happy to discuss autism on that platform. You can email me at info.fromthespectrum@gmail.com. And thank you for listening to From the Spectrum podcast.